You enter a biomechanical labyrinth, a technological nightmare of desolate corridors that suffocate and surround you from every angle. The further you walk, the more the mystery expands. It's a dizzying experience that showcases amalgamations of man and machine. Or is it the other way around? Are these cables ejecting black ooze, or are they artificial arteries spurting copious amounts of blood? Are these entities deserving of fair and moral treatment, or are they simply devices that are feigning intelligence? And if these creatures are sentient, what about the ever-expanding city that births these multitude of cybernetic creatures? For those unfamiliar, Blam is a futuristic cyberpunk manga that follows a silent loner, Killy, in his search for the net terminal gene. Now, the concept itself sounds relatively simple on the surface, but the mangaka for Blam, Tsutomu Nihei, doesn't explain what the net terminal gene is, or why Killy is searching for it. So, it's up to the reader to determine through the limited dialogue and symbolic clues what exactly is going on. Given the confusion after Blam's conclusion, Nihei wrote a prequel to the series called Noise that clarified the major plot points of the story. In essence, humanity created the Netsphere, a hyper-evolved version of the internet to solve all the world's problems. To interact with the Netsphere, humans carried a gene called the net terminal gene. Through this interaction, humans could create anything they ever wanted through a digital template. Sounds kind of like a utopian paradise. But if it were that simple, we wouldn't have a story now, would we? And as it just so happens, people throughout the city were plagued with a strange infection that deactivated the net terminal gene, thus limiting the number of people born with it. And without the net terminal gene, people could not access the Netsphere, which meant no one could issue commands to the administration, the builders, or the safeguards. I'll explain these in just a bit. Now, due to the control mechanism being lost, these three entities became chaotic and even threatened the very existence of humankind. It's essentially an Elon Musk nightmare come to fruition.
I try to convince people to slow down AI, to regulate AI. This was futile.
Now, I mentioned the three core components of the city, that being the administration, the builders, and the safeguards. The administration, also known as the governors, is a faction charged with protecting the Netsphere. The builders are autonomous machines that build new structures and improve upon the old ones. Without anyone giving instructions to the builders, however, they continue to create newer and bigger structures that have swallowed the entire planet and even reach out to the moon and the far reaches of the solar system. And finally, the safeguards were a security program controlled by the administration to protect the city and its human inhabitants. Once humans started getting infected by the virus, however, and no longer possessed the net terminal genes, the safeguards identified the humans as non-citizens and thusly marked them for extermination. So in effect, the paradise that humans created for themselves turned into an ever-expanding hellhole that housed an innumerable amount of safeguards that exist in nearly every stratum of the city. And what's more, the safeguards are constantly monitoring for traces of human or cyborg activity. Once the activity is detected, safeguards are downloaded to the area through available technology existing therein. And because the city, nay the solar system, is one technological monstrosity, thanks to the builders, they can manifest anywhere at any moment. If you're a Berserk fan, you know that Guts is marked by the brand of sacrifice, and is chased incessantly by inhuman spirits and apostles. However, in his case, he's at least safe during the daytime. For the inhabitants of Blam, there is no break. Any moment could result in a multitude of safeguards spawning to your location to eliminate you. Therefore, the only hope is to find someone with the net terminal gene to rewrite the code in the Netsphere to gain control over the builders and safeguards so that they can eliminate the chaos. Unfortunately, that's easier said than done. Remember how I said the entire solar system was one giant structure created by the builders? Now imagine trying to traverse the various layers of that structure by simply walking through it. Never mind finding the net terminal gene, which is equivalent to finding a particular grain of sand in the entire solar system. A grain of sand that might not even exist. That is Killy's raison d'etre. And as you could probably imagine, it's a long, arduous journey that is lonely, depressing, and seemingly without end. Through Nihei's brilliant artwork and adeptness at drawing architectural structures, the readers feel very very small. In effect, you are trapped in this gigantic labyrinth with Killy, attempting to piece together the sparse clues to make some sense of the situation. The most intelligent man, like the strongest, find their happiness where others would only find disaster. In the labyrinth, in being hard with themselves and with others. In effort, their delight is self-mastery. In them, asceticism becomes second nature, a necessity as instinct. Now here's the rub. Killy, who is tasked with finding the net terminal gene, which will halt the city's expansion and stop the constant safeguard attacks against the humans, is himself a provisional safeguard, and as such has regenerative capabilities that make him nearly immortal. Despite this, he considers himself human. This is where we start to open a huge can of worms, because we have to ask ourselves a pivotal question. What constitutes self-awareness? What constitutes sentience? And what constitutes being a human? At some level, we all have a general understanding of what makes human consciousness unique compared to AI. For example, humans have the ability to learn from their past experiences, utilize language to communicate with others, and distinguish themselves as free-thinking individuals with wants, needs, and desires. While AI could/will surpass humans in terms of raw intelligence, through a logarithmic computation, it will still be based on a set of rules instilled by its creator. Even if the AI could feign emotional reactions and the habits of a human, at its core, the equations are predictable, meaning the machine has no free will. And if you watch Joe Rogan's podcast at all, you know that machines are actually quite adept at feigning intelligence and sentience. As it just so happens, it's a lot easier to trick a human that something has sentience than actually displaying sentience. But does having free will mean something is conscious? Or to put it another way, does the lack of free will preclude consciousness? I want to go through a thought experiment with you. If one has a desire to eat, is it because they consciously decided to eat, or is it because the unconscious stimulated this desire to compensate for the lack of ATP? Surely, we don't consciously stimulate the growling in our stomach, the shakiness in our hands, or the grumpiness we experience when we reach a state of profound hunger. In fact, all the processes of the brain rely on neurochemical reactions that are beyond our control. A 2010 study at UCLA by Lieberman and Falk determined that if they monitored a patient's medial prefrontal cortex, they could predict a specific outcome 3/4 of the time. Whereas, if you go by what they say, you get fewer than half of the people accurately predicted. Now, by no means is this perfect, but given enough time and advancement in medical science, one could reasonably assume that we'll be able to predict actions, choices, and thoughts in the very near future. Then there's the whole notion that Elon Musk brought up.
The odds that we're in base reality is 1 in billions.
If someone beat us to the punch, as it were, then are we all simulated characters within a program that is so realistic we can't even determine if we're in base reality? Then there's the whole question of gradations of self-awareness. Obviously, humans dwarf the self-awareness of a monkey, but what if an AI dwarfed the awareness of a human? How do we appraise our own free will and sentience when faced with an intellectually superior life form? In Blam, this issue is confronted, because some people in the city felt that the emergence of safeguards and the net was a danger to their very livelihood. Therefore, they created a transhumanist cult who attempted to resolve this issue by seeking the next stage of human evolution. Through their grotesque, sacrificial experimentation, they produced human bodies using a silicon base. These silicon cyborgs were the cult's attempt at surpassing the safeguards by using their own technology and implanting it within themselves. Now, unlike the safeguards, they are still human in a sense, and they grow from fetuses. The cultists were also behind the spread of the infection that eliminated the net terminal gene from humans, resulting in the chaos that I explained earlier. And the reason that they did this is because the chaos allows their species to survive and thrive. Hence, throughout the manga, their goal is to prevent anyone from finding the net terminal gene. If the net terminal gene were found, the silicon creatures would still be considered illegal citizens and would be eradicated in short order. Therefore, to ensure the net terminal gene is never found, the silicon creatures adopt a warrior culture and kill humans at any opportunity. Now you may be asking yourself, well, if the silicon creatures were originally human at first and they're just the next stage of human evolution, why would they kill their biological relatives? Why would they kill the species that they once were? Well, there's actually evidence for this if you look at the historical records. For example, over 300,000 years ago, 9 different human species used to walk the earth at the same time. But by 10,000 years ago, they were all gone, except for Homo sapiens. Now, one of those species was Neanderthals, and it's speculated that Homo sapiens may have killed off the Neanderthals. And it's not too hard to see why this would happen. In an environment with limited resources and land, you would want to kill off other species that are sort of competing with you. And if you see a similar species that may be asserting dominance over you, you may want to use your higher intellect to outwit them and eliminate them so that they no longer pose a threat to you. And this is kind of the rationale behind the silicon creatures. Not only do the existing humans pose a threat in terms of containing the net terminal gene, but they're a species that could eventually want to get rid of the silicon creatures, so they're an imminent threat if they still exist. Furthermore, even though the silicon creatures are advanced beings, they still believe in a sort of religion, and the religion being a human advancement. And much like any religion, if there are those who don't buy into it or speak out against it, the religion may seek ways to eliminate them. For example, in the last 1,000 years, we've seen religion use the Inquisition, witch hunts, and crusades to eliminate anyone who spoke out against them, anyone who was a potential threat, anyone who threatened their power. But anyway, let's get back on track. The 4 important factions are the governors, who are entities within the net sphere who are tasked with protecting it. As such, they want to stop the chaotic growth of the megastructures and actively help Killy against the safeguards and the silicon creatures. Next, we have the safeguards and the builders, who were previously controlled through the people with the net terminal genes, but are now running rampant and proliferating the chaos. We have the transhumanist silicon creatures, who are interested in achieving the next stage of human development and benefit from the chaos in the city. And then finally, we have Killy, who is a provisional safeguard completely focused on finding the net terminal gene and putting an end to the chaos. To accomplish this feat, Killy is equipped with a gun called the Gravitational Beam Emitter, or GBE. Now, instead of firing solid projectiles, it fires an energy-like beam that is devastating and unstoppable. Let me say that again. Killy's GBE is unstoppable, making it the proverbial Deus Ex Machina of the series. But remember, Killy's goal is to find the net terminal gene, so even though he's an unstoppable killing machine, he still has to endure the thousands of years of searching for the net terminal gene. In reality, his greatest challenge is a test of patience and fortitude in completing his mission. Unsurprisingly, Nihei deprives Killy of all emotion. Having lived for hundreds, possibly thousands of years, has zapped away any emotion he had. Human life is marked by stages in which we grow, learn, and decay. Think of it like a story. The beginning is marked by figuring out who you are. The middle is when you venture off to accomplish your life's work. And the ending is the achievement of attaining what you wanted. We are all living out our own personal hero's journey that is marked by trials, tribulations, and failures. But if one were stuck in the intermediary state forever and ever, with godlike powers and immortality, it would make things rather bland. No challenge would seem insurmountable. Perspective on time would lose all significance. In fact, one might forget what it truly means to be a human being. With talks of humans integrating with machines in the future, and the possibility of downloading one's consciousness into a digital space, it makes one wonder if we are heading down a path of no return. What if our greatest challenge in the future is that we no longer have challenges? What if there are no mountains to climb? Where do we go if we become the ultimate life form? Being that I'm on Max's channel, I want to make a gaming reference to illustrate my point. Imagine I gave you a choice of playing 2 video games, one being Elden Ring and the other being Paw Patrol on a Roll on the Nintendo Switch. I'd imagine most of you would choose Elden Ring. That's because Paw Patrol on a Roll is a child's game that is easy and without challenge. Human existence is defined by challenges. Though it involves a fair amount of suffering, the reward of accomplishing such a challenge is beyond compare. Eliminate the suffering, eliminate the turmoil, eliminate the growing experience, and you eliminate that which makes us human. And I quote, "Suffering is not just something that happens to us. It is bound up in who we are as creatures that grow and change. All becoming and growing," Nietzsche wrote. All that guarantees the future postulates pain. To take joy in the future means willing the destruction of the present. Tragic art teaches us that something beautiful can be made out of even the worst suffering. It does not take away our pain, but it teaches us how that suffering can be part of the greater whole. Furthermore, Nietzsche believed in the idea that the body is meant to suffer, and it's the mind's responsibility to take that suffering and make something beautiful out of it. Unfortunately for Killy, he doesn't really have a choice in the matter. Being a provisional safeguard, he can't experience suffering on his body. Therefore, he doesn't really have anything to make out of his life. Without the suffering, there's really no purpose. And because he has a singular mission that's pre-programmed into his very being, he doesn't really have any freedom. So in this regard, Blam is a very tragic tale. It predicts a future that could be very ominous and dark, not just from the physical threats, but from the mental threats, from the threats of losing all sense of purpose and all sense of humanity. So on the surface, it looks like a manga that is highly action-packed, but underneath that, it's existential, and it's asking some very deep questions that we may have to answer for ourselves in the very near future. But perhaps that is the point of the manga itself. Perhaps Nihei is testing the reader. Perhaps he is asking a deeper question, a bizarre question that is both fanciful and introspective. In Nietzsche's philosophy, he introduced the idea of the eternal recurrence. And I quote, "What if some day or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, 'This life as you know now, live it and have lived it, you will have to live it once more, and an innumerable amount of times more, and there will be nothing new in it. But every pain and every joy and every thought and every sigh and everything unutterably small or great in your life will have to return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. And likewise, this spider and this moonlight between the trees, and likewise, this moment in myself. The eternal hourglass of existence will be turned over again and again, and you with it, you speck of dust." There's a theory in the Blam universe that time is circular, that once you reach a certain point in the history of time, that events start to repeat themselves again. Now, I believe the reason that Nihei set up the manga the way he did was to sort of play out this philosophical conundrum, the eternal recurrence, posing the question of whether or not you lived a memorable life, whether or not you challenged yourself, whether or not you went for it, no matter the difficulties, no matter the hardships, no matter your disposition. It's not Killy's fault that he's a safeguard. It's not Killy's fault that he may or may not have free will. But yet, despite it all, despite the odds of finding the net terminal gene, he goes forward, always upward, always finding some reason to keep pushing himself. And this was Nietzsche's answer to the eternal recurrence. You have to affirm life. Even if you know there's going to be tragedy and upset and crying and depression, you have to understand that it's a component of the whole. It's part and parcel of everything that makes up life. If you want to experience the greatest highs, you must delve into the deepest oceans. And you must have the confidence in yourself that what you are doing is meaningful to you and that it matters and that you believe in it.